I sold your SUV.
You can always buy another one.
Tyler needed help.
My name is Ava Bennett. I was 29 years old the day I realized my mother had never really thought of me as her daughter. Not in the full, protected, tender way people like to imagine when they say the word mother. To her, I was reliability with a pulse. I was the child who would answer the phone, cover the bill, absorb the insult, and still show up on Sunday with groceries in the trunk. The strange part is, I didn't understand that all at once. I understood it in layers, in late fees, in last-minute emergencies, in the soft, guilty voice my mother used whenever my brother needed rescuing from the latest version of himself. But the day she sold my car without asking me, something in my life split wide open. And by the end of that same evening, what I found in her house changed the story I had been telling myself about my family for almost 15 years. That morning had actually started beautifully. I had just signed the biggest contract of my career. I own a small but growing home setup and styling company outside Atlanta. We furnish executive rentals, stage high-end listings, and help developers make empty spaces feel like lives people want to step into. It isn't glamorous in the way social media makes business ownership look glamorous. It's long days, heavy boxes, vendor delays, scratched hands, and spreadsheets at midnight. It's loading artwork into a van while answering a client email with one hand and praying a supplier does not suddenly circle back with a price increase. It's knowing that a room can look effortless only because someone worked themselves nearly sick to make it feel that way. For nearly 8 years, that someone was me. By the time I was 21, I had already learned how to negotiate freight costs, style a vacant living room in under 3 hours, and smile through the kind of exhaustion that settles into your bones like weather. I built my company job by job, tiny condos first, then furnished townhomes, then boutique rentals for investors who wanted clean, elevated, emotionally warm, and always expected it yesterday. I loved the work. I still do. I loved that a space could change how a person breathed. I loved that details mattered. I loved that I could walk into an empty room and see a future before anyone else did. My mother, Denise, never mocked it exactly. That would have been easier to fight. She did something subtler. She minimized it. If my younger brother Tyler had a half-formed idea for a podcast, a sneaker resale hustle, a coaching business, or a crypto channel, she talked about him like he was a misunderstood genius, one lucky break away from proving everyone wrong. If I closed a good month, she'd nod and say, "That's nice, honey. You've always been such a worker." In our family, worker was not praise. It was assignment. Tyler was 31 now, 2 years older than me, and somehow still treated like a fragile young man finding his way. He had cycled through ambition the way some people cycle through streaming subscriptions. Fitness brand, drop shipping, real estate course, online mentorship, men's skincare line, truck flipping, digital consulting. He started everything with confidence and ended everything with somebody else holding the bill. And there was always somebody else because my mother made sure there was. When our father died, I was 14. Tyler was 16. My father had been steady, quiet, decent, not perfect, but solid in the way that makes a household feel like it has beams inside the walls. After he died, the whole emotional architecture of our family changed. My mother became harder and more dramatic at the same time. Tyler became delicate in her eyes. I became useful. I learned how to cook 3 real meals before I could legally drive. I learned how to stretch grocery money, how to do laundry without being asked, how to stay out of the way when my mother was grieving in a loud, sharp-edged mood. Tyler, meanwhile, got room to process. My mother said boys handled loss differently. Tyler got excuses. I got responsibilities. By 17, I was paying my own gas and buying my own school supplies. By 19, I was living in a tiny apartment and working 3 jobs while building my business on the side. By 24, I had my first storage unit, my first assistant, and my first decent client list. And all through those years, even after I moved out, my mother's requests never really stopped. At first, it was small. Could I cover the internet this month because she forgot? Could I help with the electric because Tyler was between opportunities? Could I send money for groceries because prices had gotten ridiculous? Could I help with a car insurance payment because Tyler was trying so hard and stress made him shut down? Every request came wrapped in the same language. Just this once. Until things settle down. You know, family helps family. I believed her longer than I want to admit. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself she was overwhelmed. I told myself Tyler would eventually grow embarrassed enough to become accountable. Instead, my help became infrastructure. Not appreciated, expected. The month before everything collapsed, I sat down late one night with my business accounts, my taxes, and my personal spending, and I saw it clearly for the first time. My future had leaks in it. Clean, measurable, recurring leaks. Money I told myself was compassion had become a system. Their names were attached to my sacrifices, like monthly subscriptions I had forgotten to cancel. That was when I made a quiet decision. I stopped using the family group chat for anything important. I moved more of my savings into a separate account. I began looking at a small showroom lease I had been scared to commit to. And I started untangling my business from every emotional obligation that had been slowing it down. I did all of that quietly, because somewhere deep down, I already knew what would happen if they sensed I was no longer willing to play the old role. Then came the contract. A property group I had been trying to impress for almost 18 months offered me a multi-phase deal furnishing and styling a portfolio of executive rentals and model suites around North Atlanta. The contract value was just over $320,000 across phases. Not profit, not instant cash, not luxury money dropped into my lap like the family would later pretend. It was revenue tied to labor, freight, storage, payroll, inventory, contractors, insurance, and 1,000 invisible business costs people never think about when they hear a big number. But it was still huge. It meant growth. It meant legitimacy. It meant I could finally move into the showroom I had been eyeing, hire proper help, upgrade equipment, and stop running a growing company out of a cramped apartment and a warehouse unit that smelled like dust and cardboard. I signed the paperwork with hands that shook just enough to embarrass me. Then I sat in my van in the parking lot and let myself feel proud. For exactly 7 minutes. Because right after that, my phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. Need to talk to you. Mom's freaking out. I ignored it. Then my mother called. I answered because hope is ridiculous like that. Some childish part of me still wanted her to say, I heard, I'm proud of you. Your father would have been proud too. Instead, she said, I need you not to overreact when I tell you something. There are certain openings in life that tell you instantly that peace has already left the room. I asked what happened. She took a breath like she was the one being inconvenienced and said, I had to make a quick decision for the family. I gripped the steering wheel. What decision? She said, I sold your SUV. For a second, I genuinely thought I had misheard her. My SUV was a black Toyota Highlander I had bought used 3 years earlier and paid off with my own money. It wasn't flashy, but it was reliable, clean, and important. I used it for client meetings, sample pickups, and personal errands when I wasn't driving one of the company vans. Because my apartment complex was repaving the lot that week, I had left the Highlander in my mother's garage for 2 nights. She still had the spare key from a holiday season when she had borrowed it. The title paperwork was in a fireproof folder I had once stored in her hallway closet when my apartment flooded 2 years earlier. I had not thought twice about it. That was my mistake. I asked her, very slowly, what she meant by sold. She said Tyler was on the verge of losing his truck and things had become more urgent than expected. She said a friend of Tyler's knew a cash buyer, and because I was doing so well now, she figured I could replace the SUV later. She said it in that astonishingly calm tone people use when they are explaining what brand of paper towels they bought. I didn't even feel anger first. I felt confusion so sharp it was almost physical. "You sold my car," I said, "without asking me?" Her voice hardened immediately. "Don't start with that tone. I did what I had to do. Tyler needed help, and you have other vehicles." Other vehicles, meaning my business vans, meaning tools I used to work. I asked where the money went. She sighed like I was being difficult. Most of it went to catch Tyler's truck up before they took it. Some went to his cards. Some went toward things around the house that were behind. It helped all of us. All of us. I asked her how she thought that was even remotely acceptable. She said the buyer had already taken it, the deal was done, and I needed to stop being dramatic because this was exactly the kind of selfish panic that makes family situations worse. Then she said the sentence that I think finally killed the old version of me. She said, "You've always landed on your feet. Tyler doesn't." There it was again, the family philosophy in one sentence. Punish the capable child because she can survive it. Protect the irresponsible one because accountability might upset him. I told her I was coming over. She said, "Good. And please don't make a scene in front of Tyler. He's already ashamed." Ashamed. That nearly made me laugh. I drove to her house so calmly it scared me. I expected to feel wild, but what I felt was clear. Clear in a way I had never been before. Like every excuse I had made for them had quietly burned away and left only structure behind. When I walked into the house, Tyler was in the kitchen, drinking something expensive and pretending to be deeply stressed. My mother was sitting at the table with her purse beside her, shoulders squared, already prepared to manage my reaction rather than acknowledge what she had done. I asked for the buyer's information, the bill of sale, and the remaining paperwork. My mother tried to redirect immediately. She started talking about how hard this month had been, how Tyler had been under so much pressure, how I had no idea what it felt like to watch one child suffer when another child had the means to help. I remember looking at her and thinking, that's interesting, because I think I know exactly what it feels like to watch one child suffer while you protect the other one. Tyler finally spoke. He said, "Ava, come on. It's not like you lost everything. You can get another car." I turned to him and asked if he planned to get another life. He blinked at me like the concept was rude. I asked again for the paperwork. My mother said it was in the hall closet safe and made a show of getting up, muttering that she could not believe I cared more about a car than my own brother's well-being. What she didn't understand was that by then, the car was already becoming symbolic. It was no longer just about transportation. It was about access, about entitlement, about the fact that she had crossed into theft so casually it meant she no longer even recognized my life as separate from hers. She opened the safe, then got distracted by a phone call from a neighbor and left the folder on the hallway table. I picked it up myself. And that is when everything changed. Inside were the car papers, yes, a handwritten note from the buyer, a lowball cash amount that made my stomach turn, a forged signature so sloppy it would have insulted me if I hadn't been so stunned. But beneath those documents was another folder, older, thicker, cream-colored, my father's last name written across the tab in my mother's handwriting. I don't know why I opened it. Maybe instinct. Maybe rage. Maybe some part of me had been waiting years for a door like that to crack open. Inside were insurance statements, probate forms, trust summaries, disbursement sheets. I stood there in the hallway reading documents I had never seen before and felt my entire childhood rearrange itself. My father had left a life insurance policy. I knew that much. What I had been told was that medical bills and debt had swallowed almost everything, and whatever remained had gone toward keeping us afloat. My mother had said there was nothing left for college, nothing left for me, nothing left for Tyler. We were all just doing our best after tragedy. That was not the truth. According to the documents in my hand, a significant portion of the policy had been placed in trust for both children, equal shares, mine and Tyler's. The record showed distributions over several years. Tyler's side had line items I could follow like a map of his protected life. Community college tuition he never finished, a down payment on his first truck, credit card consolidation, rent support, seed money for some failed business LLC, even professional equipment that I knew, without checking, probably meant cameras and gadgets for one of his reinventions. My side looked different. Household stabilization, mortgage deficiency, general family expenses, emergency debt coverage, transfer to joint household account, no college fund, no separate benefit, no investment in my future, no protected share. My mother had not just leaned on me as an adult, she had been spending my future since I was a teenager. I think I made some sound then, because Tyler looked over from the kitchen and asked what I was doing. I kept flipping pages, and there was more. There were notes from the attorney recommending that the children's portions be preserved carefully. There was one letter addressed to my mother, highlighting fiduciary responsibility in embarrassingly polite legal language. There was even a memo showing she had been advised more than once to keep records distinguishing my share from Tyler's. Instead, she used mine to hold the house together, and his to preserve his softness. That discovery hit me harder than the car, because a car was something she took that day. This was something she had taken from the version of me who still believed adults were basically telling the truth. Before I tell you what happened when I confronted her with those papers, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story is hitting you already, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. I walked back into the kitchen holding both folders. My mother saw my face and changed instantly. It was subtle but unmistakable. Not guilt exactly, recognition. The look of someone who realizes a room she thought was dark has been lit. I asked her one question. How long? She stared at me. What are you talking about? I set the papers on the table one by one in a neat stack. The insurance trust, my share. How long have you been using my money to carry this family? Tyler frowned first, because unlike my mother, he clearly had no idea there had ever been separate shares to begin with. My mother's eyes went flat in that terrifying way some people's eyes do when they decide the truth is less useful than control. She said, very carefully, "That money kept this family alive." I asked again, "How long?" She crossed her arms. "After your father died, I had to make impossible decisions." That was not an answer, and we both knew it. I told her she had lied to me for years. She said she had protected me. I asked how stealing from one child to preserve another was protection. She said I was being cruel and simplistic about a hard season I was too young to understand. But I was no longer 14, and standing there with the proof in my hands, I understood enough. What she had done after my father died might have begun in fear. I can admit that now. Houses cost money. Grief costs money. Survival gets ugly. But somewhere along the line, desperation had become preference. Preference became pattern. Pattern became identity. She stopped seeing me as a daughter who deserved her own future and started seeing me as the stable side of the ledger. Tyler finally asked what the papers were. I looked straight at him and said, "Dad left money for both of us. You got chances. I got household expenses." His face changed, but not the way I expected. Not shame, not grief. Confusion, yes, but then something smaller and meaner. Defensiveness. The reflex of a man who hears that fairness existed and immediately worries it might reduce his portion of comfort. He said, "That's not my fault." And the terrible thing is, he was partly right. Not entirely. He had benefited from it. He had certainly helped himself to a lifetime of rescue. But he was also shaped by the script my mother wrote. He was raised to believe his need mattered more than my effort. He did not invent that hierarchy. He simply wore it well. My mother stepped in front of him slightly, the same way she always did. Protect first, explain later. She said I had no right to drag old paperwork out and weaponize it when the real issue was that I was having some kind of emotional breakdown over a vehicle. A vehicle. That word coming from a woman who had forged my name felt almost artistic in its audacity. I told her I wanted every document related to the sale, every insurance paper, every account that still had my name or payment method attached, and the name of the attorney who had handled my father's trust. She laughed. Actually laughed. Then she told me I was not going to march in after all these years and act like some victim just because I suddenly had money and an ego. That was when something very calm happened inside me. I stopped trying to be understood. I took my phone out, photographed every page in both folders, and sent the images to myself, my business email, and a friend who happened to be a paralegal. My mother lunged verbally before she lunged physically. "Ava, don't be ridiculous." I told her the ridiculous part had already happened. I was just documenting it. Then I went room by room through that house, not like a daughter, but like a person auditing damage. I collected everything that was mine: textile samples, filing bins, product catalogs, a backup hard drive, framed prints I had purchased years ago, a ladder Tyler had borrowed, my emergency toolkit, decorative pieces from old jobs, a locked cash box with vendor receipts, my spare office keys, even the rolling cart I used for sample boards. My mother followed me through the house, first angry, then pleading, then furious again when pleading did not work. Tyler hovered uselessly, occasionally tossing out lines like, "You're doing way too much," the way unserious people do when consequences finally stop respecting their denial. At one point, my mother said, "After everything I did for you, this is the thanks I get?" I turned around in the hallway holding a storage bin and looked at her for what felt like the first time in my adult life. "Everything you did for me?" I said. "Do you hear yourself?" The house went quiet. People like my mother count motherhood as a permanent open invoice. Shelter you once, and they believe they can charge interest forever. By the time I loaded the last of my things into my van, I had already made 3 other decisions. First, I would file a police report and speak to a lawyer. Second, I would untangle every bill and automatic payment connecting me to that household. Third, no matter what version of guilt arrived next, tears, family pressure, church language, Facebook martyrdom, soft apologies, medical emergencies, spiritual manipulation, I was done financing it. That night, I barely slept, but not because I doubted myself. I barely slept because once you see the pattern, your mind starts replaying every scene that once felt isolated. The time my mother told me there was no college money, so maybe practical girls like me were better off working anyway. The time Tyler got a truck and I got a lecture about responsibility. The time I skipped a licensing course because money was tight, not realizing whose share had already been assigned elsewhere. The time my mother called me selfish for not covering Tyler's phone bill the same week I made payroll by selling one of my own accent chair sets. The next morning, I called an attorney recommended by my friend. By noon, I had also frozen my credit, requested copies of old financial records, and started detaching my name from anything still tied to my mother's household. Internet, grocery delivery, utility backup payments, streaming accounts, subscription services, the little invisible conveniences that had quietly made their lives easier while I told myself it was love. My mother called 14 times before lunch. I did not answer. Tyler texted in stages, which somehow felt perfectly on brand. First, anger. This is insane. Mom was trying to help. Then, insult. You always overdo everything. Then, self-interest. Can you at least send the buyer info? The amount he paid doesn't cover everything I needed it to. That one I read twice. He was upset not that my car had been sold, but that it had not fully solved his problems. By evening, the larger family machinery had already started turning. My Aunt Claire texted that bitterness after grief can poison your perspective. An uncle I heard from twice a year suddenly had strong views about honoring your mother. A cousin who once borrowed folding tables from me and returned them sticky and cracked sent a paragraph about grace. No one asked the obvious question. No one asked why my mother had access to my title papers in the first place. No one asked how long I had been covering household expenses. No one asked why documents existed showing my share of my father's money had disappeared into family overhead while Tyler's had been invested in his potential. In families like mine, the first person to stop cooperating is always accused of creating the problem. By the third day, my mother changed strategies. The crying voicemails stopped. The righteous ones slowed down. She moved into logistics. She wanted passwords. She wanted account numbers. She wanted to know why the internet had lapsed and why the grocery delivery had not arrived, and whether I could please just keep things normal through the weekend because she had company coming. Company. I saved that voicemail because it contained the entire story in miniature. Even in betrayal, her instinct was still to ask me to smooth out her inconvenience. The attorney's office called me in 2 days later. I sat there in a quiet conference room under terrible lighting, while a woman in a navy blazer walked me through what could and could not be pursued. The car sale, she told me, was serious. The forged signature helped. The low-value private cash transfer made it worse. The older trust issue would be harder. Records were incomplete. Time had passed. And mothers who blur household survival with unauthorized child benefit usage live in a moral gray zone, even when the paperwork looks ugly. But ugly paperwork still matters. It establishes pattern. It establishes access. It establishes intent. I remember nodding while she talked, but emotionally, I was somewhere else. I was mourning two things at once. The obvious one was trust. The less obvious one was the fantasy of explanation. Somewhere deep down, I had probably believed that if I ever found the right proof, the right phrase, the right document, then my mother would finally see what she had done and become truthful. But some people are not waiting for clarity. They are waiting for leverage. A week after the car was sold, the buyer returned it. Not out of kindness, out of pressure. Once it became clear there was a police report, a forged signature, and legal counsel involved, the private family deal suddenly became less appealing. The Highlander came back dusty, low on gas, and carrying the smell of another man's cologne in the seats. I stood in my apartment parking lot with the keys in my hand and almost cried. Not because of the car itself, but because getting it back felt like reclaiming language. Mine. My time. My work. My future. My name. If you like this story, subscribe my channel for more beautiful stories. After that, something in me sharpened. I signed the lease on the showroom I had been hesitating over for months. A narrow, beautiful little space with front windows, concrete floors, and enough room for styled corners, sample walls, and a proper design table. For years, I had postponed that step because there was always some crisis louder than my own progress. Tyler needed money. My mother needed help. The house needed something. Life was too uncertain. But uncertainty had a funny way of only ever applying to my dreams. So I moved forward. I painted one wall a warm clay color and the back wall soft ivory. I set up shelving for fabric books and hardware finishes. I brought in a long oak table big enough for layouts, invoices, and vision boards. I hired one full-time assistant and another part-time installer. I upgraded my warehouse racks and stopped apologizing for building something real. Work became cleaner after that. Not easier, but cleaner. The mental static was gone. I had not realized how much of my creativity had been consumed by low-grade family crisis management until I got my mind back. I styled better, negotiated better, slept better. I stopped waking up and checking my phone like it was a hospital monitor for other people's dysfunction. And of course, the moment my life became visibly more stable without them, my family became interested again. My mother started posting on Facebook in that vague, performative way wounded people do when they want sympathy without facts. Lines about betrayal, about children forgetting sacrifice, about the heartbreak of being abandoned after giving everything. Tyler posted quotes about fake people and how success reveals character, which was bold coming from a man who once spent rent money on a branding shoot for a business with no customers. For a moment, I considered posting receipts, real ones, transfers, bills, screenshots, copies of the trust documents, the forged vehicle papers. I imagined how quickly public opinion would turn if I laid out the whole ugly architecture in numbered slides. But then I realized something I wish I had learned younger. You do not heal by applying for justice from an audience that enjoys drama more than truth. So I stayed quiet. I worked. I approved lighting, met a developer, argued professionally with a sofa vendor about lead times, ate lunch in my own showroom on a folding chair, and felt more peace than I had ever felt at my mother's table. Then, one Wednesday morning, a silver SUV pulled up outside the studio. I looked through the front glass and saw my mother get out first. Church blouse, structured purse, conflict hair. Tyler stepped out after her in a jacket that still looked too expensive for a man whose income had become inconsistent enough to qualify as weather. My Aunt Claire came too, because every dysfunctional family likes a witness who will later describe herself as neutral while supporting the louder side. They stood outside my storefront sign for a moment. Then they came in. The thing about success is that it forces people to update their lies. My mother had spent years acting like my business was a nice little side thing, a practical hustle, something dependable but unremarkable. Standing there in my showroom, surrounded by mood boards, styled vignettes, polished shelving, project binders, and samples beautifully arranged under good lighting, she had to confront the scale of what I had built. I watched her take it in. Not just the money, the discipline, the consistency, the adulthood of it. Tyler tried to recover first. He gave a low whistle and said, "Wow, this is actually legit." Actually. I told them I had 10 minutes. My mother drew herself up and said there was no need to be cold. She said they had come because the family had been through a painful misunderstanding and perhaps it was time to talk with open hearts. Open hearts. That phrase coming from her nearly made the paint peel. I said, "You have 9 minutes now." My Aunt Claire winced, which satisfied me more than it should have. My mother began with pride. She said seeing the studio made her realize just how hard I had worked. She said maybe none of us had handled recent events very well. She said grief and money and old wounds make people act in ways they regret. Tyler nodded along as if emotional revision were a group project. Then, right on schedule, the real pitch arrived. He started talking about branding. He said my company had potential to be much bigger if it were marketed aggressively online. He said he had ideas about audience growth, partnerships, content strategy, digital positioning. He said with my eye for design and his instincts for reach, we could build something powerful as a family. There are moments in life when audacity becomes so pure it almost turns elegant. They had not come to apologize. They had come to re-enter access through a prettier door. My mother followed quickly. She said maybe the past had been painful, but this could be a fresh start. Maybe Tyler needed a role. Maybe working together could heal things. Maybe family business would bring everyone back to what matters. My aunt added, sometimes God uses conflict to realign people. I looked at the three of them standing in the middle of a room I had built from discipline, restraint, and private exhaustion, and I felt the kind of clarity that no longer needs emotion to sustain it. No, I said. Not loud, not dramatic, just complete. Tyler frowned first. You didn't even hear the idea. I heard it, I said. It's the same idea dressed in better clothes. My mother's face changed. Ava, don't be ugly. I almost smiled. Ugly, another family word, usually deployed the moment honesty stops being convenient. I told them this business was not a reconciliation package. It was not a family reset button. It was not a reward for finally noticing I mattered. Tyler said I was acting like he had never struggled. I said struggle was not the issue. Plenty of people struggle. Plenty of people fail. Plenty of people need help. What destroys relationships is not struggle. It is entitlement without accountability. It is the expectation that someone else's labor should forever cushion your consequences. My mother stepped in then, voice softer but sharper underneath. She said she had made mistakes, yes, but I was acting as though she were some criminal instead of a mother who had done whatever she had to do to keep her children afloat. I looked at her and said, you didn't keep your children afloat. You kept Tyler comfortable and told me survival was character building. The room went still. My aunt tried to intervene with the weary diplomacy of someone who likes peace as long as it costs someone else. She said maybe there was a middle ground. Maybe Tyler could start small, maybe part-time. Maybe help with outreach until he found stability again. I said, this company hires people with a record of work, responsibility, and follow-through. Tyler actually looked wounded by that. And maybe I should have felt softer. Maybe I would have if he had not spent years benefiting from my softness while calling it selfish the moment it ended. My mother's voice cracked then, but not with remorse, with frustration. The frustration of a person who has discovered the old script no longer works. She asked if this was really how I wanted things to be, and that question landed harder than she meant it to. Because no, it was not how I would have chosen things. If I could have chosen, I would have had a mother who was proud of me before strangers were. I would have had a brother who saw my work, not as available backup power. I would have had a childhood where being strong did not automatically mean being assigned more pain. I would have had the truth about my father's money when it could still have changed the shape of my future. But we do not get to choose what happened, only what we protect next. So I told her exactly that. I said, no, this is not what I would have chosen, but it is what I choose now. Boundaries, distance, peace. For the first time in years, I think she really saw me. Not the reliable daughter, not the fixer, not the emotional extension of the household. Just a woman who no longer required permission to protect herself. Tyler muttered something about me being arrogant now that I had a storefront and turned toward the door. My aunt followed his movement with her eyes, already preparing the version of the story she would tell later. My mother stayed a moment longer. Then she said the quietest, saddest thing she had said in the entire conversation. I did the best I could. And if she had said that differently, with truth inside it, with humility, with even 1 ounce of honest grief for what had been unequal, maybe some small, careful part of me would have opened. But she said it as a shield, not a confession, not regret. A shield. So I answered her with the only truth left. No, I said gently. You did what was easiest for you. She flinched like I had struck her. Then she left. After the door closed, I stood in the center of my showroom and listened to the silence settle around me. Not punishment, not loneliness, ownership. A month later, I landed the second phase of the developer contract. 2 months after that, one of my styled model units was featured in a regional real estate piece online. A former teacher messaged me to say he had always known I would build something meaningful. A realtor I loved working with sent flowers with a note that simply read, "You made a future out of very little room." That's a rare kind of talent. I cried over that note alone in the studio after everyone left. Not because it was dramatic, because it was simple. It recognized the thing I had needed recognized for years. The family updates still reached me in pieces, usually through relatives who claimed they were staying out of it while delivering every detail. Tyler eventually sold the truck he had nearly cost me my car to protect. He picked up steady work for the first time in years. My mother talked about downsizing the house because bills had become too much. I do not celebrate that. I truly don't. Watching people meet reality is not the same thing as wanting them destroyed. But I also refuse to confuse consequences with cruelty. That was the lesson everything taught me. For years, I believed love meant absorbing damage quietly. I believed being the strong one meant being the available one. I believed that because I could survive being overlooked, it somehow mattered less when it happened. I don't believe that anymore. Strength is not consent. Competence is not an invitation. And your success is not a debt your family gets to collect just because they were standing nearby while you earned it. I still believe in helping people. I still believe in generosity. I still believe families can go through hard seasons and come back from them. But help should build a person toward responsibility. It should not subsidize their refusal to grow. And love that only appears when you are useful is not love. It is access wearing a familiar face. Sometimes people say boundaries are harsh because boundaries force them to finally feel the weight they kept setting down on you. That does not make the boundary wrong. It makes the old arrangement visible. These days, on the shelf behind my desk, I keep a small framed card in simple black lettering. It says, "Built on my own terms. Not because I need motivation, because I need memory. Because peace is easier to protect when you remember what it costs to build." And if there is anyone listening to this who has spent years confusing your usefulness with your worth, I hope you hear me clearly. You do not become valuable only when you are saving someone. You do not owe endless access just because you survived what would have broken someone else. And if choosing your future makes certain people call you selfish, let them. Some people only notice your boundaries when they can no longer reach your wallet. If you like this story, subscribe my channel for more beautiful stories.